Hi everyone, welcome back to MEG Motors. Today we're going to be working on this Weedeater Featherlite line trimmer. I've actually worked on a couple of these before. There's a few of them around. They're a relatively low end trimmer. There's no clutch on them. Yeah, just a small lightweight trimmer, easy for smaller people to use. Not a big heavy trimmer like some of the 4-strokes, for instance. They're good trimmers. They work okay. Just nothing special about them. So yeah, we're going to work on this one and see if we can get it running. Just like all of them, we need 3 things to make it run. We need compression, we need spark, and the spark has to occur at the right time, and we need fuel. And I can tell you that this one's got a ton of compression. Almost feels like too much compression. It's got so much, so that's good. So we're going to run a start on spray test. We're going to open the air cleaner, take out the air filter. We're going to spray a little carburetor cleaner in the opening of the carburetor, and then we're going to pull it through and see if we can get it to just pop off a little bit. If it'll pop off, then we know our ignition system's working and that we do in fact have enough compression to run. I've already noticed that it's got broken fuel lines, so I know we're going to do fuel work on this one, but let's make sure there's nothing else wrong before we do that. So let's get it over here. I'm going to hold the throttle wide open and choke wide open. All right, let's see what happens. All right, so you heard that little start, I hope. And so that little start is enough to tell us that our ignition system is working and we're firing the plug and we're firing it at the right time. We obviously have enough compression for it to run, so we're going to pull the carburetor off of this one, put some fuel lines on it, and see if we can make it run. All right, so let's get the carburetor off of this one. Like I said, here's a fuel line. It's broken. They're brittle, and they're not terribly hard, but they're brittle. So I'm going to take a couple of screws out right here. And there's our carburetor, just kind of falling off. All right, here's our carburetor. I'm gonna clean it up a little bit, and then we're gonna open it up and see what's going on inside. Obviously, like I said, we have fuel lines that are broken off that we're gonna have to replace. But yeah, let's do that work, and hopefully we'll end up with a good trimmer. All right, so here's our carburetor. This one's a Walbro. Hopefully you can read that right there. Standard diaphragm style carburetor. On all these small engine appliances, weed eaters, trimmers, hedge clippers, chainsaws, there's 3 main components to the fuel system that we have to look at and evaluate. The primer, and sometimes the primer is integrated into the carburetor and sometimes it's separate. A primer, there's the fuel lines themselves, and then the carburetor, primarily the diaphragm that's on the metering side of the carburetor. And it's been my experience that if one of those is bad, they typically all need to be serviced. And so on this one, the primer bulb actually feels really good. It's still soft and flexible, and it even appears to be pumping fuel. Like I can hold my finger over this and I can feel suction when I let go, and this side has pressure. And so it may seem like this is probably all okay, but given that the fuel lines are broken and they're in really bad shape, it's a good chance that all of this needs service. And so we're gonna go ahead and service all of those parts while we're working on this one. And so standard diaphragm style carburetor, we have 2 main components. We have a fuel pump on one side. This side's a fuel pump. And then we have a metering chamber on this side, and there's a passage through the middle of the carburetor that connects those 2 sides together. So the fuel pump side obviously pumps fuel out of the fuel tank, and then it presents it over here on this side to the metering chamber, and the metering chamber is somewhat like a float bowl on a standard style carburetor, but a float bowl won't work on these because we have to be able to turn them in any direction, and a float bowl style carburetor only works when it's straight up and down. So we're going to open the fuel pump side first and see what's going on in there. All right, all looks pretty clean. So this is our fuel pump side. This is the fuel pump diaphragm, and we need to look on this side to make sure that this part, which is the part that actually pumps the fuel, is not ripped or torn or doesn't have any holes in it. And it looks really good. And then these two pieces right here, these two little flaps, they serve as one-way valves, and so they work in conjunction on this side. So they'll sit on top of one of these holes, and if fuel tries to go down into the hole, the flap will block that hole off, but fuel will be allowed to come up out of the hole. And those two one-way valves in conjunction with the diaphragm are able to pump fuel out of the carburetor and present it right over here on top of this screen. There's a small screen right here. And that screen is in front of the passage that goes across the carburetor that I mentioned earlier. And the fuel from this side is where it will pass over to the metering chamber side for use by the engine. And so we're going to go ahead now and open up the metering chamber side. See what's going on. This is where we typically see problems. Although I'm not sure what we're going to see this time because, like I said, parts of this one still felt okay. A lot of times when the fuel lines are hard, or when the fuel lines go bad and get hard, the primer bulb goes bad at the same time. All right, so this is our metering chamber. Let me see if I can pull the gasket off of this. There's the metering chamber, and here's our metering diaphragm. And yeah, this one actually feels really good. So this diaphragm needs to be soft and flexible. And this one's in pretty good shape. It's not perfect, but it's in pretty good shape. And so what happens on this side, like I said, the fuel pump will present fuel here under pressure. And on this side, the engine will draw fuel out of this chamber. And as it draws fuel out of the chamber, it will pull this diaphragm down into the chamber until it hits this lever. And when it hits this lever, it will unseat the needle over here, which will open the passage from the fuel pump and allow fuel to flow into this chamber and fill the chamber. And as the chamber fills, it'll raise the diaphragm back up off of the lever, and the needle will seat, and it'll block the flow of fuel. And so the diaphragm is a critical part of how this carburetor works. If it gets hard and rigid and can't move easily, it can either hold the needle open, in which case the engine will flood, or it can not open it at all, in which case the engine will starve for fuel. But this one feels really good, so this was probably okay. I'm going to take that needle out of there just to make sure that it's clean. You want to hold your thumb over the lever when you do that because it's spring loaded, and if you lose that spring, it'll be hard to find. It's pretty small. All right, so there's our carburetor. It actually looks really good. I suspect that this probably would have ran just fine if we'd have put some new fuel lines on it. But we're going to put a new diaphragm on it, and we're going to put a new primer bulb on it, and then we'll put it back together, replace the fuel lines, see if we can make it run. So let me pull some parts, and we'll get ready to put this back together. All right, so let's work on putting this back together. First thing we're going to do is we're going to clean this needle. It's got a little bit of discoloration on the tip. Just spray a little carb cleaner there. And you can kind of see what comes off of the needle. Then we'll put that part back together. We'll put the needle in first, set the spring in place. You have to be careful about this part because, like I said, if that spring goes flying, it's going to be very hard to find. And so there's a little dimple on the lever, and that dimple is where the spring goes. So I'm gonna hold all of this together, and I'll put it on the spring first, and then slide it back and work it under the needle. Then you can look from the side, and hopefully you can see that the spring is on the dimple where it belongs. And then we'll put the retainer screw back in. So there's one other thing that I like to check when I do these carburetors. It's really not usually a problem unless you replace the lever or the needle, but the height of this lever is important. And so to check it, we have to look and find the model number of the carburetor, which in this case is a WT, and then we need this gauge right here. And we can find the same model number on this gauge right here. It says WT. And so we'll hold this up against the gasket surface where the metering diaphragm mounts, and the gauge should just barely touch the lever. And this one's really, really close. Maybe just a touch low. Let me see if I can bend that up just a little bit. And then you just bend the lever if you think it's out of adjustment. And so now when we put this up here, it just barely touches. So that's good. So the old gasket, the old metering diaphragm, it was actually stuck to a gasket. There's always a gasket there. It's not always apparent, but there's a gasket. And so when we put this side back together, the gasket goes on first, and then the diaphragm goes on top of the gasket. Then we put our cover back on. Put our screws back in. These don't have to be terribly tight, just snug them up. All right, and then our fuel pump goes back on. Now we have our new primer in place. And this fits better one way than the other. All right, and then we'll put our screws back in here. All right. That completes our carburetor overhaul. Let's put some fuel lines on it and see if we can make it run. All right, so here we are with our two pieces of fuel line. We have the large size here, which will be used for the return line, and the smaller size that will be used for the fuel pickup. To get those in, I have a tool. I actually have two tools. This tool is a tool that I bought. Has a hook, a ring on one end and a hook on the other end, and we can feed this tool in through the tank, into the opening in the tank, and hook a fuel line on it and pull that fuel line back up out of the tank. The problem is this tool won't fit in the small hole, and so what I've had to do for the small fuel lines is make my own tool. And so this is just a piece of safety wire that I've bent a small hook on the end, and I can use this one to pull in the small fuel line. And so to get that started, I cut a taper on the end of the fuel line, and then I'll pull this tool in and back out through the opening, and I'll take my awl, just a sharp instrument here, and I'm going to pre-poke a hole in this fuel line just like that, and then I'm going to work the fuel line onto this hook on the end just like that. I'm going to use a little bit of lubricant. You can use whatever you have available, soap or oil or whatever you have. I use some rubber lubricant that I use when I mount tires. And then I'm just going to work this back and pull this fuel line, or pull the tool back out through the opening in the tank, just like that. All right. And then A little more lubricant. I'm going to put the pickup back on this fuel line. Just like that. And then I can put that in the tank. I'm going to look in the tank while I pull this fuel line back some more until I think I have the right length in there. That actually looks pretty good. I'm just going to leave that until I get the carburetor back on, and then we'll cut it to the right length. All right, so for the next one, it's the same process, but I can use the commercial tool that I have. So I'm going to pull that in here. I'm going to cut a taper on my fuel line, or I already got one on this end. So I got a taper on the line already. I'm going to poke a hole in it. I'm going to put it on the tool. I'll lube up the cable, fuel line a little bit. We're going to pull this one in. Alright. And like we talked about, I'm going to put this little plastic piece around the end of the fuel line. I'm going to pull this line all the way through until that piece hits the top of the tank. Alright, so there's our two fuel lines. Let's get our carburetor mounted back up, and we'll cut those to length. So we're going to hook our throttle cable back up. And just tighten our carburetor screws back up. Alright, so like I said, you can hold your finger over the fuel lines and kind of tell which one's which. That's the suction line. So that's the one that's going to get the small line that goes to our fuel pickup. And so I'm going to clip that line off about right there. And I'll work that right on that fitting. And then this is going to be the return line. So same kind of thing. I'm going to clip it off about right there. Slide it right on this fitting right here. All right, so that pretty much does it, I think. Now we need to put some fuel in it, and we'll test the primer, make sure that it pumps fuel, and we'll see if we can make it run. All right, so I've got some fuel in the tank. We're going to pump the primer bulb, and hopefully we're going to see fuel come up the small line, fill up the primer bulb, and then go back out the big line. So let's see what happens. There it came up the small line. That's a good start. And there it is going down the big line. All right, the primer bulb's got fuel in it. So I think we're ready to try to start this one and see if it'll run. All right, let's see how we did on this one. The kill switch is momentary. Oops, got the choke lever out of place. The kill switch is momentary, so it's on. I've already pumped the primer. We're going to go to full choke. Uh-oh, our throttle seems to be stuck. Looks like I got something out of place here. Give me just a sec. There we go. I had the throttle cable was wrapped around something it wasn't supposed to be. So I'm going to go to full throttle, and we're going to pull it through and see if it'll start. There's our first start. any better than that. So yeah, I think we can call this one fixed. That was a relatively easy repair, pretty standard. Like I said, I think on this one, we probably could have just put fuel lines on it. I think it probably would have run. The carburetor wasn't in that bad a shape. And obviously tons of compression, so we didn't have to do too much to fix this one. So yeah, I hope you liked the video. I hope that encourages you to get out and work on your own. This weed eater was actually given to me by a friend of mine. I do a bunch of work for him on other stuff, and so he actually gave me this one. But you can typically pick up a weed eater like this at a garage sale that doesn't run for about 10 bucks. And so 10 bucks, and I probably put, you know, I buy in bulk, so it's cheaper for me, but probably no more than $10 worth of parts in it. And so for $20, you could have a working weed eater, and $20 in, you know, 20, 30 minutes of your time. Yeah, so I hope that encourages you to get out and work on your own, either fix the one you have or go buy one that doesn't work and get it running again. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check my playlist. There's other videos out there about small engine repair. And stay tuned. We'll see you on the next video.